Welcome to Once Upon a Podcast, where we discuss some of the hottest topics in the advertising industry today. In this first episode, we're talking about AI and exploring the impact it's having on creatives and clients alike. We hope you enjoy it, and if you're keen to get involved in one of our upcoming episodes, please get in touch at conversations@onceuponatime.agency.
Joining me today for the conversation, Andrew Pilgrim, Managing Director here at Once Upon a Time, Jolly O'Meldrum, Creative Director, Colin Burrows, Filmmaker. So first off, Jolly, you've been leading us through, playing with this is probably the best word for the last year or so. Maybe you can talk us a bit about how that's been for you. What have you learned? How's that journey been?
Yeah, well, I think it was, as you say, a year. It's been a bit less than a year, which is shocking, because we thought AI as a tool was so far in the future, but suddenly it was here. So I think I heard about something that was something where you could put text into and you get an image out of. It was like magic, so I couldn't believe it. So did a bit of research and found out about Stable Diffusion, about Midjourney, about DALL-E. So I was speaking to some concept artists that were playing with this back in the day, and they gave me an invite. So I was invited to the beta testing, which was great. So I could actually get under the skin of it and work out, what the hell this thing was that was so magical that we couldn't realize, how does this technology work? So I began that probably back in March and April. So I was beta testing for Midjourney and DALL-E, which some people may or may not be familiar with. And then been on the ride ever since. So I think from that, we got to about June. And we started to see how much this was accelerating in terms of fidelity, what it could produce. And then that's when we had a chat and decided that I think it could be quite useful for our creative process internally and for the client process as well.
Yeah, I remember you showing me back in June, which certainly wasn't that long ago, and looking at what that application could mean for our agency, for our clients, and just being completely blown away with the quality of the output that was being generated.
And I think it's a complex world in terms of AI and what it means creatively. But I think the key takeaway that we've learned from all of this learning is really the fact that it's a tool that enables us to get to what's in our head quicker.
This is what really excites me about everything that we've seen and been using to date. It's the collaboration with the client to really improve that output and get to that output quicker. Yeah. It's additive to what we currently do.
All of these fundamentals that will be additive to any technology that you have. If you don't know how to interface with it or talk to it or direct it, let's say, you're not going to get a sort of really nice high fidelity result. So I think, and the funniest thing is the team are now going and looking at camera techniques, camera lenses, camera language, all these things that they're learning. I mean, they're starting to just suck in all this information, which is fantastic because it shows that this is actually benefiting the vernacular of creative. So for me, I think it's a really positive result.
I am old enough to have done, worked with Disney on standard 2D animation. And some of the great animators like Glenn Keane, and then along came Pixar in 3D, and I interviewed a bunch of those animators early on, and they were all banging on for hours about lighting and camera angles and lenses. I hadn't realised at that point that understanding camera angles meant you became a better artist.
Absolutely, but I think that's the creative process.
And here we are 20 years later talking about the same principles to learn a new craft.
And when we talked about craft and people's experience, I think this is the early process of iteration and inspiration. Now, I think if we keep it back at that level, where we start to use it in our process, so with our clients for visual inspiration, with the team for visual inspiration to start with, so I'm thinking of these elements, but how do I iterate, multiple color palettes just to get an idea of where I want to head with this? So I think for us, it's very much an early interpretive, inspirational process.
Yeah, you wouldn't use your images exactly as their output to provide client work, because you have to still have that creative eye over it. You still have to craft that image.
So Colin, I just want to pick on something you said there about Pixar and the 30-odd years experience, and the fact that actually would make you better, conversely, even though you haven't practiced with this tool, but if you did so, you'd have a very different viewpoint than someone starting out. So I guess this is something that, from a creative perspective, the more techniques, the more you live through the different ways of expressing ideas, the better you're going to be at using this technology. Is that a fair kind of summary?
I think so. I mean, because it's very easy when anything new comes along, particularly when you're a little bit older, to go, bah humbug, this will never catch on. And if you're saying that, the train's already left the station. So, and that's one of the nice things about working in the creative industry, is you're always learning something new, and there's always something new around the corner. And that's why I think we've all got involved in this conversation, that you get pulled along. But you need to be working through. I mean, to your point, you need sort of years of experience, don't you?
Well, I think some people don't put it in context. So, for example, if you just thought that actually it would understand your camera language, so then you start to input with that type of experience that you have, then it would start to change your output. So I think, again, people with more experience across the industry will start to realize they can interface with this in a completely different way. Again, real positive for people that have all that experience under their belt.
It's the text to vision thing that slightly blows my mind. So you're typing in 4 people sitting around a sofa like this. Where's it pulling that information from to give you an image?
Well, that's the really interesting conversation that's probably set alight the internet at the moment. But with all machine learning, it needs a data set. So I think I compare it to human experience. So let's say, for example, as a young artist, you're wandering around seeing things, or even just as a young person, whatever formulates your worldview is your input. So whether it's that you're attracted to certain things, I love this orange, this is really interesting, and you go around picking up all these bits of information. So technically what we've done is we've fed this machine learning system the world at speed 1 million times over, and this really wide data set for it to pull from. So it knows what a tree is, it knows what an orange is, it knows what these things are, to then be able to rebuild them in a different guise. And again, I'm not an expert on this, and extreme expert in the technology itself, but how it's operated so far, I've got an understanding that can simplify kind of how that works.
And so each image is unique, and it's created from the ether, yeah? So
absolutely.
Where
it's predicting pixels, so it's going, right, is this a fish? Maybe it's a fish. Oh, it looks like a hand. No, it's a fish. So it then starts to rebuild and reconstruct and relearn.
With that in mind, what will be the biggest impact on our clients in terms of, is it the briefing process, is it the speed, is it the cost? How's this going to play out, do we think?
I think it will have an impact in all of those areas. I think with the initial client conversations that we've had, and we've had some brilliant and exciting client conversations, everyone's had the same reaction as we have to what we've been shown. But we've had conversations around collaborative briefing, and our clients literally coming in and sitting next to a Joel's or a member of his team and sitting there and formulating the brief together, and to Joel's point, getting out of people's heads, actually putting it into paper in a quicker way.
And Colin, your experience as a filmmaker, we've been talking a lot about kind of static, I think, key art, copy. What about moving image?
Well, I think moving image is obviously the next stage down the line, isn't it? And actually, I think what's interesting is gaming's already doing this kind of stuff and is pushing. And I mean, the gaming industry is so much bigger than the whole entire film and television industry worldwide. So they've got money and they've got users to do that. And they're already in that world. And that's a natural thing. I can see AI or machine learning, whatever we call it, pushing that forward. And we're already using, artificial backgrounds and keying in backgrounds and green screen and all the rest of it. So this all feels, again, we've talked about this before, it's more like it doesn't actually change what you want to do, which is still tell a story. It's just another tool.
So Jules, in terms of the structure of a team, and if I'm a young kind of artist and I have ambitions to work in the industry, maybe in your team or anywhere for that matter, how much of this should I be kind of focusing on AI versus the traditional skill set that you would have learnt when you were coming up?
I think the traditional skill set is key because it gives you fundamentals that work across the industry. So I think you need to understand composition, you need to understand lighting, how it all operates. But I think the thing is, once you've got your fundamental core down, it's then how you use technology to take that even further. So when I started learning 3D, that gave me a whole other string to my bow where I could iterate some really amazing concepts that before would have taken me, let's say 4 days to come up with this really cool concept and execute it in Photoshop. Whereas learning 3D, it gave me the access to do that within the space of an hour and a half. But I've managed to get this concept out of my head to a place that's really far advanced very, very quickly. So the chances of that then going ahead for a client are way higher. So I think, again, trying to think of that end result. Sorry, back to your question in terms of what people should learn. I think the fundamentals are always key for craft. But then that layer of technology over the top that helps you take it that step further, I think that's something you should always embrace.
I'll ask each of you one question to finish, if that's okay. And that question is going to be, if you can name one thing that you think is going to the biggest impact over the next, let's say, 18 months, in our industry and for our clients? What's that one thing going to be? I'll start with you, Andrea.
For me, it'll be account team briefing, greater ideation and visualization in terms of the number of iterations that we're able to create for the same time period, for the same budget.
Jolyon?
A very similar answer. I think, again, being able to get to what's in your head quicker, so communication, absolutely key. And I think, as we've mentioned previously, that this whole idea of communicating via copy or text, when you think we work in a visual medium, there's so much of it that's done by an email, for example. But if you could do that via a visual medium, how much quicker would we get to those accurate concepts? So I think for me, there'll be a huge shift in communication to a more visual medium for clients that, you draw a little sketch on a napkin, they apologize for it, but actually at least it gives you an insight. So I think to be able to do that at speed will be fantastic.
Great. Colin?
Well, all of the above, except I think actually what also will happen is, an 18 months you asked about, I think there'll be a revulsion about AI, because we'll get to a point where there'll be a lot of second-rate AI stuff done on second-rate campaigns, and I think marketing directors will get to the point of, I know what I want and it's not AI, because there's a very similar feel to a lot of stuff, particularly in the sort of fantastical end of things. And even I, as a humble amateur, am beginning to recognise AI stuff. And I think the public are going to get to that point, and there's going to be a pullback.
I think the best thing about that is it values the craft and the actual reality of the input, the hours that people put into this. Whereas I think people might take a cheap shortcut and try and utilise AI as a final image. And if they do that, well, they'll get that result. But I think being able to pair that with the experience that we all have in the industry, to be able to get to something that does require the craft, but understanding how you utilise technology to benefit the client and ourselves, I think.
Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to sharing further episodes with you in the coming months. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's discussion, please get in touch at conversations@onceuponatime.agency.